Pam Bondi stepped into the dimly lit courtroom, the air thick with the scent of old wood and polished leather. The walls loomed high, lined with shelves of legal tomes that had borne witness to countless rulings, some just, others questionable. At the far end of the room, elevated above the rest, sat Judge Howard Gates. His presence was unmistakable, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and radiating the kind of authority that made even seasoned lawyers tread carefully. She had prepared for this moment. The evidence against Charles Lawson, the wealthy developer accused of siphoning public funds into his private empire, was airtight. Financial records, sworn testimonies, a paper trail so damning that a conviction should have been inevitable. But as Bondi stepped forward, she felt something else, a tension in the air that went beyond the weight of the case itself. Gates barely glanced up as she took her place at the prosecution's table. Instead, he flipped through a file with an air of deliberate boredom, the corners of his mouth curled in something resembling amusement. The defense team, seated across from her, shared knowing glances, their body language exuding confidence. Too much confidence. Something was off. The hearing began, and from the moment Bondi spoke, Gates made it clear he was not interested in a fair proceeding. He interrupted frequently, dismissing key points before she could finish presenting them. When she introduced a document outlining the misallocated funds, he waved a hand, brushing it aside as if it were an insignificant detail. His remarks, bordering on condescending, drew scattered chuckles from the defense's side. Bondi refused to be rattled. Years in the legal trenches had prepared her for difficult judges, but this was different. This wasn't just a display of tough judicial scrutiny, this was obstruction. Every time she attempted to build her argument, Gates shut it down, ruling objections in favor of the defense with mechanical precision. As she continued presenting her case, she stole a glance toward the jury. The confusion on some of their faces mirrored her own unease. They could see what was happening. The game was rigged. But the question gnawed at her, why? The answer came in the form of a subtle exchange. It was quick, almost imperceptible. A flicker of a look between Gates and Lawson's lead attorney. A brief, almost smug nod. In that instant, everything clicked. This wasn't just judicial arrogance, this was control. Manipulation. Gates wasn't just being difficult. He was protecting someone. Bondi's pulse quickened. This case wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. It was bigger. Deeper. And if she wanted justice, she was going to have to play her own game, one that Gates wouldn't see coming. Pam Bondi maintained her composure as she laid out the financial documents before the court. The evidence was clear, meticulously organized into spreadsheets and transaction records that told an undeniable story of corruption. The numbers didn't lie. State funds had been funneled into Charles Lawson's private developments, disguised as legitimate expenses. The money trail led directly to off-the-books payments, shell companies, and unexplained budget discrepancies. As the courtroom settled into a tense silence, all eyes turned to Judge Howard Gates. His expression remained carefully neutral, though Bondi noted the faintest twitch in his jaw as he scanned the documents. Then, with an air of dismissal, he closed the folder, fingers tapping lightly against the bench. The moment stretched uncomfortably, anticipation hanging thick in the air. Then, with barely a glance at the paperwork before him, Gates ruled the documents inadmissible. He framed it as a matter of procedure, something about improper sourcing, irrelevant data points, an unnecessary delay to the court's time. His reasoning was thin, flimsy even, but his voice carried the weight of finality. The defense team exchanged satisfied glances. A few of them smirked, as if they had expected this outcome all along. The confidence with which they had walked into the courtroom earlier now made sense. They weren't just prepared, they were assured of protection. Bondi suppressed the irritation rising in her chest. She knew how to navigate difficult judges, but this was beyond obstruction. This was blatant interference. Still, she had another card to play. A key witness, Philip Grayson, a former accountant for Lawson's company, had agreed to testify. His initial statements had been damning, describing how internal financial records had been altered to disguise the flow of misused funds. He had detailed how invoices had been fabricated, contractors paid for work that was never done, and city permits conveniently fast-tracked with bribes. If anyone could confirm the validity of the prosecution's case, it was him. Grayson entered the courtroom with hesitant steps, his shoulders drawn inward as if trying to shrink himself. He was visibly nervous, but that was to be expected. Exposing corruption at this level was dangerous. Bondi watched him carefully as he was sworn in. The courtroom had gone completely silent, waiting for his testimony. He cleared his throat, hands gripping the railing tightly, his knuckles pale against the wood. Then something shifted. His posture stiffened, his gaze flickering toward the defense table. A slow, uneasy breath escaped him before he cast his eyes downward. When the first question was posed, the answer was not what Bondi had expected. Grayson hesitated, then denied having direct knowledge of the fraudulent transactions. He dismissed his earlier statements as speculation, misinterpretations of internal business dealings. His words were careful, measured, and completely different from what he had originally disclosed. Bondi's stomach sank. She recognized the signs. The tension in his shoulders. The way his eyes darted, searching the room as if looking for unseen threats. His deliberate, hollow responses, answers that were just neutral enough to avoid outright lying while still protecting someone. Philip Grayson had been silenced. The defense attorney sat back in his chair, arms crossed, looking supremely unconcerned. Lawson, too, exuded an air of quiet certainty, his expression unreadable but relaxed. Judge Gates observed the exchange with that same detached amusement, as if this were all playing out exactly as expected. Bondi's mind raced. Something had gotten to Grayson. Maybe a threat, maybe a financial incentive, maybe both. The fear in his demeanor suggested something far worse than just legal pressure. She glanced at the jury, reading their reactions. Some looked confused, others skeptical. The contrast between the witness's previous statements and his sudden change in testimony was glaring, but without direct proof of coercion, it was now nothing more than suspicion. The corruption didn't just stop at Lawson's finances. It was woven through the very fabric of this courtroom. The judge, the defense team, the witness, someone, somewhere, was pulling the strings. And if they thought she would back down now, they were mistaken. The day had been a battle, but Pam Bondi wasn't done fighting. As she left the courthouse, the evening air felt thick, carrying the weight of unspoken threats and unseen forces working against her. The hearing had been a carefully orchestrated sham, from Judge Gates' blatant obstruction to Philip Grayson's sudden change in testimony. There were too many hands in play, and now she had to figure out whose grip was the tightest. Reaching her car in the dimly lit parking garage, she fished for her keys, still replaying every moment from the courtroom. That's when she noticed it. A small, unmarked envelope rested on the windshield, held in place beneath the wiper blade. No address, no handwriting, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Bondi's pulse quickened as she removed it, glancing around the garage. The space was nearly empty, save for a few cars tucked in the shadows. A security camera sat in the corner, its lens pointed just slightly off-center, leaving blind spots. Whoever had left this package had been careful. Inside the envelope was a flash drive, black and unremarkable, with no markings. No note accompanied it, no explanation. Just the small, weightless piece of plastic that suddenly felt heavy in her palm. Settling into the driver's seat, she locked the doors and retrieved her laptop from the passenger seat. Instinct told her to wait, to check the drive in a secure environment, but curiosity and urgency overruled caution. Plugging it in, a single folder appeared on the screen. For your eyes only. Inside, several audio files and a series of emails waited. Bondi's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she clicked on the first recording. Judge Howard Gates' voice filtered through the speakers, clear and unmistakable. The cold authority in his tone was gone, replaced with something sharper, urgency. He wasn't speaking from the bench but in private, caught in the middle of a conversation he never expected to be heard. The words confirmed everything. Gates wasn't just biased, he was actively working with Charles Lawson's legal team to dismantle the case from within. He had been guiding them, ensuring evidence was dismissed and directing them on how to pressure key witnesses into silence. He spoke of Bondi with open disdain, making it clear that if she wouldn't back down on her own, they would make the trial so unwinnable that she would have no choice but to walk away. Her hands tightened into fists. Clicking into the emails, the corruption stretched even further. Messages between Gates and Lawson's defense team outlined their strategy: court rulings designed to stall proceedings, financial incentives for those willing to adjust their testimonies, and vague references to ensuring the right people remained protected. One email thread even hinted at plans to have someone from Bondi's own office leak internal strategies to the opposition. She exhaled slowly, her breath shaking. The sender of the flash drive had given her something explosive, but the real question loomed larger: who? Who had access to these recordings? Who had the motive to turn against Gates and Lawson? The leak had to come from someone close, someone inside their circle. Was it a whistleblower? A rival with their own agenda? Someone who had been cast aside and now wanted revenge? Bondi wasn't sure yet, but one thing was certain. The game had changed. And this time, she had the upper hand. Pam Bondi walked into the courtroom with a steadiness that masked the fire burning beneath her skin. The weight of the flash drive in her pocket was not just physical, it was the key to unraveling everything. Today, the tide would turn. Judge Howard Gates sat in his usual place, exuding the same unshaken confidence, his gavel resting lightly in his hand. Across the aisle, Charles Lawson and his defense team appeared as smug as ever, their expressions hinting at the belief that they had already won. The witness betrayal, the suppression of evidence, it had all played out exactly as they had intended. But they had not accounted for this. Bondi approached the bench, calmly placing a small speaker onto the evidence table. She watched Gates out of the corner of her eye, noting the way his gaze flickered slightly in interest. The moment stretched in heavy silence as she inserted the flash drive and pressed play. The courtroom filled with the unmistakable voice of Judge Gates. His tone, so different from the professional facade he maintained in this very room, was laced with irritation and control. The words were clear, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. He was instructing someone, one of his unseen allies, to ensure that key documents never reached Bondi's hands. The strategy had been simple: obstruction, suppression, and, if necessary, the complete burying of critical evidence. A shift rippled through the courtroom like a slow-building storm. The defense table went rigid. The jury's expressions ranged from confusion to stunned realization. Reporters in the gallery scrambled to take notes, eyes wide with disbelief. But the most telling reaction came from Gates himself. His fingers tightened around the gavel, his normally controlled expression freezing in a mask of disbelief. For the first time, the arrogance faltered. A flicker of something deeper, fear, crept into his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to interject, but Bondi was already moving. She placed a stack of printed emails onto the evidence table, flipping through them with deliberate precision. Each one bore his name, tied him to Charles Lawson's defense team, exposed the depth of his manipulation. Every ruling he had made to dismantle the case was accounted for, traced back to a coordinated effort to protect Lawson at all costs. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. Gates attempted to recover, but the damage was done. The weight of the evidence crashed down upon him like a slow, inevitable collapse. Then came the final move. A side door creaked open, and the bailiff stepped forward, his presence measured but purposeful. He had been briefed beforehand, waiting for this moment. The room hushed into a deafening silence. Bondi retrieved the document she had kept hidden until now, a warrant. Signed, sealed, ready for execution. The charge, obstruction of justice. The gavel never fell. Gates never had a chance to protest. The authority he had wielded for so long had been stripped away in an instant. The sound of metal clicking shut echoed louder than anything he could have said. The once powerful judge, now in handcuffs, sat motionless as the reality settled in. The courtroom, once dominated by his presence, no longer belonged to him. Justice had just been reclaimed. The gavel never struck. The hearing had ended not with a ruling, but with a judge in handcuffs. Howard Gates, once untouchable in his courtroom, sat motionless as the bailiff tightened the metal around his wrists. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a stunned silence. The courtroom itself was still processing what had just happened. The jury exchanged wide-eyed glances, while reporters, scribbling furiously, sent messages to newsrooms that would break the story within minutes. A judge arrested in his own courtroom, justice turned against the very man meant to uphold it. But Pam Bondi wasn't focused on the spectacle of it all. Her eyes shifted to the defense table, where Charles Lawson had gone rigid, his grip tightening around the armrest of his chair. His lead attorney, so confident earlier, now whispered urgently in his ear. Whatever advice was being given wasn't enough to mask the sheer panic written across Lawson's face. Then came the moment she had anticipated. The realization that his protection had crumbled. Lawson leaned forward, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. He was already working out an exit strategy, figuring out how to shift blame, how to negotiate his way out of what now felt inevitable. Bondi braced herself. The wealthy never went down quietly. The offer came quickly. A deal. A way to save himself. Information in exchange for leniency. Bondi studied him, weighing the options. Taking down Lawson was the reason she had taken this case in the first place. But now, after what she had uncovered, she knew the corruption stretched beyond just him. Gates was only part of the problem. A larger network existed, one that had embedded itself in places she hadn't yet seen, one that had been confident enough to manipulate a courtroom in broad daylight. Someone else had been pulling strings behind the scenes. Someone powerful. Her instincts told her that this wasn't over. She agreed to hear Lawson out. That night. Bondi left the courthouse late, exhaustion pressing down on her, but her mind refused to slow. She had spent hours listening to Lawson's legal team prepare statements, trying to shape the narrative before it reached the media. He had given enough information to suggest that Gates had been part of something bigger, but not enough to name names. Not yet. Her car was parked in the same dimly lit garage as before. The events of the day had changed everything, yet the space felt eerily similar. The silence, the hum of distant traffic, the way shadows stretched too long under flickering lights, it all felt unchanged. Until she saw her phone screen light up. A message. This isn't over. You exposed one, but the real threat is still watching. Bondi's breath stilled. The sender was unknown. No number. No way to trace it back immediately. She glanced around the garage, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone she was. The sense of victory she had felt hours ago evaporated, replaced by something colder. She had assumed the leak, the anonymous flash drive, had come from someone close to Gates. Maybe a disgruntled insider. But what if it had come from someone higher? Someone who wasn't just exposing Gates but using her to remove him from the equation. Bondi had uncovered corruption. But now, she realized, she had also made herself a target. This wasn't just a trial anymore. This was a war.